Hey guys, welcome back to Unit 4 on energy conversions. Today we're talking about photosynthesis. We just finished talking about energy conversions and trying to connect photosynthesis and cell respiration. And so this is a little bit more details on photosynthesis itself. There's going to be some pretty specific details, and I show you this not because I think that you have to know every single little chemical detail of it, but this is followed up with AP biology. And if some of y'all want to go into AP biology, then you kind of have to know a little bit about what is going on here. So as we get started, let's look at kind of an overview of photosynthesis. And so we're going to start off and we will kind of let's give it a definition, right? So this is the reaction in autotrophs that occurs when the green pigment chlorophyll absorbs solar energy and converts water and CO2 into glucose and oxygen gas. And you guys already know, because we just did the equations, that would be sunlight plus CO2 plus H2O produces O2 plus C6H12O6. We can balance it just to make sure that we are being correct. And then we have the intended product right here. And then we have a waste product right here with 6O2. Again, to remind you all, the carbon cycle, it's really good that that's a waste product for that. So this is occurring in, I say autotrophs because it's not just plants. It's also occurring in certain bacteria cells that are known as blue-green algae. It is occurring in certain organisms, single-celled organisms in kingdom Protista, things like that. So it's not just plants, but for our purposes, you can just kind of think of it as plants. And it is happening inside chloroplasts, which you can see a bunch of in here, these little green blobs inside these plant cells, whatever kind of plant cells they are. And you can see they have lots of chloroplasts in there. The chloroplast has a lot of structure going on the inside. You can see that it has kind of two layers, an inner membrane and an outer membrane. There are explanations for that, again, that we probably won't really get to, but we can kind of understand why. And then there are these stacks of what we call thylakoid discs. And so that is listed right there. And each stack is called a granum, and there's a fluid outside of them called a stroma. And there's a lot of memorization here, right? And so the book will help, but also, like, I'm not trying to play gotcha with these little tiny technical names of as far as a thylakoid disc versus grana as a stack of thylakoid discs. It's more about the equation and what plants need and what plants produce. And that's what you can see over here. This is a really standard outline of photosynthesis. It shows two halves of it that we're going to do on the next 2 pages, things that we call the light reactions and then the Calvin cycle. And it shows you the things that plants need and the things that plants produce, all of this happening inside different parts of the chloroplast right here. So that's what we're talking about. And let's start off with part 1 of photosynthesis, the light reactions. Okay, so if we wanted to do a definition of this, right, like this is the first half of photosynthesis. The green pigment chlorophyll, located in the thylakoid discs of the chloroplasts, absorbs blue and red light. Water is split. Electrons and hydrogen are stored in NADH, NADPH, I need to put that on there, and some ATP is produced. So this should hopefully look like a cell membrane to you guys. It is not a cell membrane. It is a membrane of the thylakoid discs within the chloroplasts. And so certain things like charged particles and large polar molecules cannot pass through here. And what's going to happen if we do a half reaction? So this is the half reaction of photosynthesis, is that you have sunlight plus H2O, and then this is the very first thing that's going to happen. This is going to be split, okay? And so we end up with oxygen over here, right? And we also are going to, when you split this, you get some hydrogen atoms, which are technically protons. We're going to combine those with one of these temporary energy or electron carriers, NADP plus. And if we add some hydrogen and some electrons there, then we can get NADPH. And we also want to add in some ADP, which means we can get some ATP, right? And so this is not a complete reaction. This is not a 100% correct reaction, but it's kind of like getting an understanding of this first half of photosynthesis, the light reactions, where the whole goal is to split water right here. And so if you have light, you have H2O, and we're going to split water. When chlorophyll absorbs some of that light, we immediately get rid of that O2, and we get some H plus and some electrons, and they're going to be passed from thing to thing to thing. And then eventually we turn NADP plus, after it grabs onto those with another reaction, into NADPH, because it grabbed onto H plus E minus. Okay, what you need to see here is that there is no sugar. We are not done. We have done the first part by absorbing solar energy and breaking water in half. We haven't done the second part of turning that like stored energy, right? So this is now stored energy. We haven't turned that into sugars yet, and so that's going to be in the next step right here. There are a ton of details that I am leaving out of this, and that is okay, right? And because you end up making this hydrogen ion concentration gradient, and we already know that concentration gradients can flow through channel proteins that are transmembrane proteins. They're going to flow through this thing called ATP synthase. And so there's tons of details in here that I think are really, really interesting. This is not the time or place for us to really focus on them, but I do want you to make sure you know that photosynthesis has two halves. The first half requires light but doesn't make sugar, which you can probably assume the second half makes sugar but doesn't require light. So if we move on to the second half of photosynthesis, it is called the Calvin cycle. It used to be called the dark reactions, but it doesn't have to happen in the dark. It can happen in the light. And so what's going to happen here is ATP from the light reactions that we just saw powers the reactions that combine hydrogen in NADPH with carbon dioxide to make sugars. And we can see a lot of that stuff that we did during the previous one, right? Well, we made some ATP. We made some NADPH, and those are holding on to the energy and the electrons and the hydrogens from water, right? So our half reaction here would be ATP plus NADPH. Okay, so there's the molecule that does the work. There's the one that's holding on to the electrons and the hydrogen, plus CO2, right, is going to produce C6H12O6. Eventually, it actually turns out that it makes a 3-carbon carbohydrate first, and then it will make a bigger one, plus ADP plus NADP plus. So those two things can now go back to the light reactions and be charged up again to do this whole thing again. There is no sunlight here at all. Okay, sunlight is not necessary for this part to happen, but this one does create the sugars right here that plants need as their food source, right? And so those are the two halves of photosynthesis. Again, I'm not trying to play got you on what are some very technical details, but what I do want you to do is know that there are two halves, and the two halves are linked together by molecules made in the first half and used up in the second half, and it's just kind of how these reactions work. So, and so that is kind of like photosynthesis in a nutshell, right? In a little nutshell, here is photosynthesis. So, that being said, I think there's something that is really important to understanding how photosynthesis works, more important than even all of this stuff right here, is understanding pigments and absorption and reflection. Okay, so a pigment is a molecule, okay, just a chemical compound that interacts with light. Okay, compounds that absorb some colors of the electromagnetic spectrum but reflect others, and only absorbed energy can be used for work. So it turns out you can make a graph for this, and this is a graph that you will guaranteed see on whatever test or quiz we happen to do. And this graph on the independent variable has rho g biv, but I'm going to make it, let's see, these are longer wavelengths. Let's do this one. I'm going to pause for just a second. Okay, I'm back. I had to sneeze. Sorry, excuse me. Okay, so we have the colors of the spectrum right here. And if you think about the waves of electromagnetic spectrum, then these are wider, longer, and let me get closer, closer, closer. And it turns out that you have very short wavelength. I did that completely wrong. That's why I did it this way. So you have really short wavelength, and then you get longer and longer and longer wavelengths like that. So red colors have longer wavelengths. Violet and blue colors have a shorter wavelength light. Just to remind y'all, past this one we get infrared and then microwaves and radio waves, and past this one we get ultraviolet. On the x-axis, what we're going to measure is the percent light absorbed. Okay, so I'm going to do two lines right here. I'll even match the colors here. Let's think about the pigment chlorophyll, which we know looks green. If it looks green, then we have to think, okay, is that color of light being reflected or absorbed? Because the sun is hitting plants with all of these colors with white light, the combination of all of these colors. And so we think, okay, is chlorophyll absorbing or reflecting violet? Well, we don't see it, so it must be absorbing it right here. Same thing with indigo. It is absorbing that right there. Same thing with blue, but it turns out it is not absorbing green light. And so you end up getting this, and this is an estimate, this is not exactly what it would look like, but you end up getting this line that does this. And this would be the chlorophyll absorbance spectrum. This shows you which colors chlorophyll is absorbing and which colors it is reflecting. Okay, and so when chlorophyll is hit by like the green colored light, then no photosynthesis can happen because it's not absorbing that energy that is necessary to split water. But the other line I want to put up here is this one. This right here is the rate. Let's label this right here. Let's get rid of that. This one is the rate of photosynthesis at different colors. So if you shine violet light on a plant, chlorophyll absorbs that much, and the photosynthesis rate is right there. No problems at all right there. And if you shine red light on a plant, chlorophyll absorbs that light, and photosynthesis is occurring at that level right there, right? What doesn't make any sense is if you shine green light on a plant. If you shine green light on a plant, the light is not absorbed, and yet photosynthesis is still occurring. How is that possible, right? We said that photosynthesis is required in order to, or that absorbing solar energy is required to make sugars. And I'm telling you right now that when you shine green light on a plant, that photosynthesis can still happen. It's at a little bit of a slower rate. The only possible explanation for that is alternate pigments, okay? Secondary pigments. Things like yellow xylophil. Well, yellow xylophil, it has its absorbance spectrum. It's like trough. It's the lowest point is at yellow because it appears yellow to us. And then you can see that it would do this right here. And then this right here. And we can even put things like the orange carotenoids, which are going to have the trough right here, and then have a peak, and have peaks in those directions right there. And so those other pigments can absorb the solar energy and pass that energy onto chlorophyll where water is split. So what that does is these alternate pigments, the big picture here is that they increase the rate of photosynthesis because plants can absorb all colors. Okay, plants absorb all of the colors. Now, that doesn't mean that they do photosynthesis equally well in all colors, but technically, yes, plants can function at a minimum level by absorbing some green light because of xanthophylls and carotenoids and other secondary alternate pigments. By the way, these are the alternate pigments that you see in the fall right around right now when certain trees go dormant and they stop water transport into the leaves. And chlorophyll is the first of the pigments to break down because it's very, very, very water sensitive. And so if that one breaks down and plants stop reflecting green light because they don't have that anymore, well, then you see the other pigments that are there all the time. You just don't really get to see them. And then if the yellow ones break down, or whichever one happens to be next, you see the oranges and you see the reds, and some of the red pigments are known as I forget the name of the red one right now. So, but lycopenes are one of my things. So it doesn't matter. But that's the whole point. That's why in the fall you see those other colors, because chlorophyll breaks down first. When everything is broken down, all you see is brown leaves as they fall off of the trees, and that's the color of the cellulose cell walls when that is all that is left. So all right, that is photosynthesis, and hopefully that helps. Remember, when it comes to those little details and the light reactions in the Calvin cycle, I am more interested in y'all focusing on the big picture aspect of this, and any questions that come from that will be very, very few, and so focus on the big picture stuff. So. All right, we will get to cell respiration next time, where we will be doing a lab report on yeast cell fermentation. So I will see you all in class.